Welcome to the deep dive. You gave us the sources on the frontiers of computation and scientific discovery, and we've distilled the core mission, and it really comes down to one word: speed.
That's right. Today, we are focusing entirely on efficiency, on accelerated discovery. And we're looking at three fields that seem really disparate: AI, autonomous labs, and scientific data mining.
But there's a common thread.
Absolutely. The core finding is that the big breakthroughs aren't coming from just brute force anymore. It's not about more data or faster processors.
It's about organization.
It's about organization. We're looking at these groundbreaking methods that get massive gains by, intelligently reusing prior knowledge or by enforcing these deep hierarchical structures.
Finding the shortcuts.
Exactly, the shortcuts to really profound discovery.
Okay, so let's start with what might be the biggest bottleneck in AI today. I mean, the fundamental limitation of large language models when it comes to, true deep reasoning.
Right, we know they can talk beautifully, but can they actually think algorithmically?
And the problem is, it's baked right into the architecture.
It is. Almost all modern LLMs, they rely on the transformer architecture. And even though we call it deep learning, structurally, a transformer is, well, it's paradoxically shallow.
Shallow. Okay, what do you mean by shallow? What can't they do?
Well, it means they're extremely limited in what are called complexity classes. They are fantastic at pattern recognition, at interpolation, which is great for language.
Sure.
But they fundamentally struggle with the kind of computation you need for deliberate planning, for recursive problem solving, or, deep search.
So think of something like a Sudoku puzzle.
A Sudoku puzzle is a perfect example. The model is built kind of like a massive one-shot lookup table. It can see every part of the prompt at once, but it can't process information in multiple nested steps over time, not like a human mind does.
That distinction makes so much sense. So if they're inherently flat, I guess, in their reasoning capacity,
Yeah.
how are they solving these complex problems we see them do, like multi-step coding or logic puzzles?
Ugh, that's where the crutch comes in. The crutch of chain of thought, or COT prompting.
Right.
COT is basically a way of externalizing the reasoning. It forces the shallow model to break down a complex, latent reasoning task into a series of visible, text-based steps.
So it's literally thinking out loud, token by token.
Exactly. It's like watching someone type out their inner monologue.
But using language as the medium for pure logic, that just seems incredibly inefficient.
Oh, it is. It's brittle. A single mistake in that generated text can derail the entire output. And critically, it's slow. So slow. The model has to translate its whole reasoning process back into language.
We needed to think internally.
We need it to think internally, to do that deliberate reasoning inside its latent hidden state, not relying on this slow sequential output stream.
Okay, so let's get to the solution and the sources. The Hierarchical Reasoning Model, or HRM. This is fascinating because it doesn't just add more layers. It actually changes the shape of the computation.
Yes, and it's explicitly inspired by the human brain, specifically the brain's multi-timescale processing.
Like slow strategic thinking versus fast tactical thinking.
Exactly that. It uses two coupled recurrent modules designed to replicate that very thing. Think of, the slow theta brain waves coordinating the fast gamma waves in our brains.
So what are these two modules?
You've got the high level, or H module, that's your strategist. It's for slow, abstract planning, setting the goals, and just maintaining the overall context.
And then the other one is the executor.
The executor. That's the low level, or L module. It performs the rapid, detailed computations. It's focused on solving the small, immediate substeps that the H module dictates.
The performance jump here it's just incredible, especially when you consider the model's size. We're used to hearing about models with hundreds and billions of parameters. How big is HRM?
It is tiny, just 27 million parameters.
27 million.
For perspective, GPT-3 has 175 billion, and on top of that, researchers trained HRM with only about 1,000 examples.
1,000.
1,000. And no massive internet-scale pre-training, no COT data. It's a total paradigm shift away from brute force scaling.
So how does this tiny, specialized model handle problems that just completely baffle the giants? I mean, let's talk about those deep search tasks, Sudoku extreme puzzles, or finding the optimal path in these huge 30 by 30 mazes.
Yeah, these aren't language problems.
No.
They're logic and planning problems. They require deep algorithmic reasoning, the ability to track state over long horizons. And when you apply a state-of-the-art chain of thought models to these,
They fail.
they fail completely. 0% accuracy, consistently. Their fixed, shallow structure just cannot handle that kind of recursive search space.
And a little HRM model.
It achieves near-perfect performance. It hits 55% accuracy on Sudoku Extreme and 74.5% on the maze hard problems.
Wow.
I mean, that difference going from 0 to nearly 3/4 accuracy, that's the proof. It shows that structure, not size, is what enables true, deep algorithmic thought.
That is a staggering contrast. But okay, does this generalize? I mean, a model's reasoning has to go beyond specialized puzzles. Did they test it on something designed for, say, generalized inductive reasoning?
They did. They used the abstraction and reasoning corpus, the ARC-AGI benchmark. This thing is a real test of fluid intelligence. It requires the model to infer underlying abstract rules from just a few examples
And apply them to new things.
and apply them to novel inputs exactly. And HRM achieved 40.3% accuracy.
Which is, how does that compare?
Well, you compare that again to the leading CoT models, which often struggle to even break 25%. Claude 3.78K context, for instance, only scored 21.2%.
So the structural change is what's making that enormous leap possible. But you mentioned earlier that standard recurrent networks can struggle, they can converge too early, get stuck.
Right, they get stuck in local loops.
So how does HRM avoid that trap while running these really deep computations?
This is the central technical innovation. They call it hierarchical convergence. Think of the two modules like a project manager, that's H, and a dedicated executor, that's L.
Okay.
The executor module, L, is running a specific computation, say, trying to place a number in a Sudoku row, and it converges very quickly.
So it's about to get stuck in a rut.
Precisely. But before it gets completely stuck, before it hits a dead end, the project manager, the H module, steps in. It takes the partial result from L, uses it to update its overall strategy, and then it resets the L module's path with a fresh context.
Ah, so it's constantly giving it new direction.
Exactly. It allows for stable, nested computations. The project manager provides this constant high-level guidance, which prevents the executor from getting lost down in the weeds.
That makes the process sound very deliberate, but also, I mean, potentially very computationally expensive, right?
Yeah.
Running these nested loops.
You'd think so, but that's where the second key innovation comes in. It's called adaptive computational time, or ACT.
Okay.
And again, it's inspired by our own brains, which can toggle between what we call System 1, that's fast, automatic intuition, and System 2, the slow, deliberate calculation.
Right.
So HRM uses Q-learning to dynamically figure out the optimal runtime. If the L module solves the problem quickly, the model just halts. It stops. It only spends extra computational steps when the problem truly requires that deep System 2 reasoning.
So it saves a ton of computation on the easier tasks.
A significant amount.
The whole design is so rooted in this biological thinking. And the sources point to this amazing emergent property in the trained model that really seems to validate the whole parallel, the dimensionality hierarchy.
This might be the most compelling finding of all because it confirms a hierarchy is actually learned. It's not just imposed by the architecture.
So what did they measure?
They measure the complexity of the internal representation space of both modules using something called the participation ratio.
And what did they find?
The high-level planning module, the H one, it operates in a substantially higher dimensional space. We're talking a PR of almost 90. The low-level execution module, L, is in a much lower dimensional space, around 30.
So the planner is 3 times more complex, more flexible than the executor.
Exactly. The architecture organically learned that strategy requires this vastly richer, higher dimensional space than simple execution does.
That's incredible on its own.
But it gets better. When they calculated the ratio of those complexities, it was about 2.98. And amazingly, this ratio closely matches the ratio they've observed in the mouse cortex, about 2.25 between low-level sensory areas and the higher-order areas, like the prefrontal cortex.
The part of the brain responsible for planning.
The part of the brain known for planning.
Okay, wow. So why does matching the mouse cortex ratio matter? Is that just a cool coincidence, or does it really validate the whole approach?
It validates it completely. It suggests that this hierarchical structure isn't just an efficient design choice for AI. It might be a fundamental universal principle for any system that needs to go from shallow pattern recognition to deep, flexible planning.
The brain discovered it, and now AI is independently discovering the same principle.
That's right.
That's a powerful conclusion for our first topic. Escaping these shallow models through internal reorganization. Okay, now let's take that theme of leveraging structure and knowledge transfer and move it completely outside the computer. We're going into the physical world of self-driving laboratories, or SDLs.
This is a perfect segue. We just saw internal structure solving an AI bottleneck. Now we're going to see external knowledge structure solving a scientific one.
And these autonomous labs are already a huge step up, right?
Oh, absolutely. They use active learning algorithms, often with Gaussian processes, to intelligently decide which experiment to run next. It's already vastly superior to the old way.
Which was just grid sampling, just test everything.
Test everything. It's slow, requires hundreds of data points.
Um,
Active learning with GP, it cuts down the sampling requirements by, 80% or more to map something complex like a material phase diagram.
but there was a massive inherent inefficiency.
A huge one. It treated every new material system as completely unique. Tabula rasa.
So if you spend a year mapping the phase diagram for material A and then you start on material B, even if it's a close chemical cousin, the lab just starts from scratch, throwing away all that accumulated knowledge.
Precisely. That is the exact problem that researchers wanted to solve with a framework they call PhaseTransfer.
PhaseTransfer, okay.
It's a transfer learning framework designed to leverage those previously characterized phase diagrams, they call them the source models, to speed up mapping a new target system.
But how does it actually integrate that old knowledge without being misled? I mean, that's the danger, right? Negative transfer, where bad information hurts more than it helps.
It is, and it relies on this really clever three-pronged probabilistic approach. So first you have your target model, which is actively learning the new system.
Okay.
Second, you have your source models, which is the library of all your prior phase diagrams. Maybe you have 10 or 15 of them.
And what's the third piece, the part that prevents that negative transfer?
That's the critical component. It's called the weight model. Think of it like a fact checker or a knowledge filter. It assesses the local reliability of the source knowledge.
So it's not all or nothing. It's saying, hey, in this temperature range, your old data is probably still good, but over here where the composition is totally new, your old data is useless. Ignore it.
That is a perfect metaphor. That spatially varying reliability assessment is what unlocks the efficiency gains. It tells the lab exactly where to focus its precious experimental resources.
And this feeds directly into the algorithm that chooses the next experiment, the acquisition function.
It does. The acquisition function is modified to explicitly concentrate sampling on the regions where the transferred source knowledge proves to be unreliable.
So it hunts for novelty.
It hunts for novelty. It forces the lab to find new phase boundaries that it's never seen before, while at the same time, it exploits the regions that align really well with the prior reliable knowledge.
So what kind of benefit did this actually give them in synthetic tests before they even got into the real lab?
Across our synthetic benchmarks, PhaseTransfer achieved a reduction in sampling requirements of around 50% compared to just standard active learning.
50%. You're having the number of experiments.
Having the experimental burden. And when you're talking about real-world science, drug discovery, material science, that is huge. Lab time is expensive, samples can be precious.
So they took it into the real world.
They did. They validated it on a real system using Phase Explorer, which is an autonomous microfluidic platform. They were mapping the phase separation of BSA-PEG biological condensates.
Which is relevant for understanding how cells organize themselves.
Exactly. And they didn't just dump all their old data in. They had a library of 13 phase diagrams, but they used a source pruning algorithm to pre-select 4 diverse sources. Another structural decision.
Smart. So what was the result?
The result was that PhaseTransfer reached their target error threshold of 5% in just 2 batch iterations.
And standard active learning.
Standard active learning required 4 iterations to hit that same error threshold.
A twofold acceleration in a real complex biological system.
It confirms the robustness. Because of those spatially varying weight models, PhaseTransfer successfully identifies and just suppresses any unreliable sources. It protects against negative transfer.
So you always do at least as well as starting from scratch, and usually much, much better.
That's the power of structured transferable knowledge.
We've seen internal structure in AI and external knowledge structure in the lab. Now let's shift to our third and final type of knowledge acceleration. Extracting meaningful connections from what might be the messiest, most overwhelming data source out there. Patent documents.
Oh, this is a monumental challenge for data miners, one that PubChem recently decided to tackle. Patents are a goldmine of information, but they are incredibly noisy.
Intentionally noisy, right? For legal reasons, commercial protection.
Exactly. So patents often list hundreds of annotations in their description section. You'll get routine processes, dozens of generic solvents, molecular fragments that are totally irrelevant to the core invention.
So a simple co-occurrence count would be meaningless. If I search for a drug and a protein and they show up in the same pattern, I have no idea if they're linked or if they were just both, you know, dissolved in ethanol and water.
You'd have no idea. The counts would be completely dominated by generics like water, salt, basic chemicals. It would drown out the actual inventive connections.
So how did PubChem solve this? How did they filter the noise to boost the signal?
They introduced two critical heuristics into their co-occurrence score calculation. The first is what they call the informativeness weight, or alpha.
Okay.
This heuristic directly addresses that high count, low specificity problem. It gradually decreases the contribution of any annotation from a patent section that contains a huge number of other mentions.
It penalizes verbosity. So if a section lists 50 generic solvents, each one contributes less than a single unique chemical listed in the claim section.
Precisely. And the second mechanism deals with those ubiquitous entities, the ethanols and the sodium chlorides of the world.
The ones that appear everywhere.
The ones that appear everywhere, that's the inverse dataset frequency term, or dollars. This is classic text mining, but it's highly effective here. It just severely downweights anything that appears commonly across the entire patent dataset.
And the sources show the impact of this is it's dramatic, especially when they combine it with an optional chemical exclusion list.
The difference is stark. Without the exclusion list, if you query for the top 10 chemical neighbors for something really valuable, like neoplasms, cancer, or the insulin gene, the results are useless.
What do you get?
Water, ethanol, sodium bicarbonate, generic lab chemicals.
But once they apply that exclusion list.
The results instantly flip from noise to signal. For neoplasms, the neighbors become specific, clinically relevant anti-cancer drugs, doxorubicin, paclitaxel, cisplatin. For the insulin gene, the neighbors shift to established anti-diabetic drugs like metformin and exenatide.
It successfully extracts these scientifically meaningful, actionable relationships from a sea of noise.
It really does. It transforms an unusable spreadsheet of raw counts into something a drug researcher can actually build a hypothesis on.
But the sources also pointed out an interesting trade-off here. It's not a perfect system.
No, and it highlights the human judgment involved. When they applied the exclusion list, while it removed all that generic noise, it also accidentally removed one well-known association. D-glucose was lost from the neighbor list for insulin.
So even with sophisticated algorithms, optimizing this kind of knowledge extraction is still part science, part human curation, because sometimes a ubiquitous chemical is actually fundamentally relevant.
Exactly. You have to decide where that trade-off lies. But the great news is that this refined, meaningful data is now integrated directly into PubChem. Researchers can access it programmatically and skip the cleaning process entirely, and get straight to the insights.
Okay, let's bring this deep dive home. We've gone through 3 completely different domains, but they're all focused on this theme of acceleration.
We saw the Hierarchical Reasoning Model, HRM, escaping the limits of shallow AI by mirroring biological organization. We watched PhaseTransfer reuse years of chemical knowledge to get a 2-fold 50% speed boost in a physical lab.
And finally, we saw PubChem's patent scoring apply these clever heuristics to structurally filter just debilitating noise from complex documents.
The core takeaway for you, the listener, is that in every single one of these domains, neural nets, autonomous robots, giant text databases, the bottleneck isn't processing power. It's not data volume.
It's the limitation of linear, shallow, or just brute force processing.
And superior performance comes from building better structures, both internal and external, that enable efficient knowledge transfer and hierarchical organization.
That's the fundamental multiplier.
That's the multiplier that lets these systems leapfrog their competition.
So what does this all mean? If both artificial intelligence with HRM and autonomous discovery with PhaseTransfer are finding that the path to superior performance requires learning and establishing these structured high-dimensional hierarchies, what does that tell us about the fundamental requirements for any truly intelligent system, natural or artificial? Perhaps the secret to mastery isn't just size. Maybe it's always been about organization.